Welcome. It's so good to be back and to have you all with us today. We will begin with a quote from Alain de Botton, who, in a book called The Architecture of Happiness, writes, "Our sense of beauty and our understanding of the nature of a good life are intertwined. We seek associations of peace in our bedrooms, metaphors for generosity and harmony in our chairs, and an air of honesty and forthrightness in our taps." I love this particular quote, particularly because of the taps. The focus on the specificities and particularities of our life is such a rich one because it leads to these very granular and somehow deep and profound insights into what really makes us tick, both as individuals and as a collective. And it really helps us understand what meaning looks like. I'd never thought that a tap could be forthright, but it kind of makes sense. I really like my taps honest. I'm still not sure entirely what that means, but I know that he's hit upon something really meaningful there, and that association opens up a field of inquiry for me that really helps me to look at my bathroom in a totally different way. I'm living in a place right now where the taps are somewhat dodgy, and I begin to understand why sometimes I'm like a little bit less happy when I wake up in the mornings because my taps are not being direct with me. So it's a lovely place to start, and it's a lovely place to start this conversation with a really incredible guest. And I'm so happy that we have the space and the time to do this and to welcome Joe Edelman. Joe, as many of you know, is just an incredible designer who's been working at what started as Time Well Spent, but then became the Center for Humane Technology. Many of their interviews, particularly with Audrey Tang, are hidden somewhere in the kernel syllabus at different stages. And the work that Joe has been doing on values-based design at the School for Social Design, a link to which I will share in the chat in a moment, is really deeply aligned with much of what we have written about meaning and value, many of the discussions that we have had over the years, and an inspiration for what we have been working towards with a new shape for kernel that takes what we've learned from cohort-based education over the last few years and thinks about how to move it more towards spaces and further away from some of the potentially negative outcomes of current business development practices, shall we put it that way. Joe is on a visionary mission to rebuild society based on meaning. And I have shared the two videos in which he presents those visions prior to this discussion. So, Joe, I think the place where I would really like you to begin, because we're so interested in dialogue, in stories, in listening, in kind of telling the story of how we might rebuild society for meaning, you often refer to the difficulties, the struggle, the people who might have supported you but perhaps didn't, the human stuff, right? The human stuff of pursuing the vision quest. I think that sometimes in these presentations we get the waxed and polished version, which is, made to look lickety splits and off we go. Like, yes, we can totally do it. But perhaps you'd be willing to share like why, like the deep why. Why does this matter to you so much? And to what lengths has it taken you in terms of really bringing it forth into the world?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Here we go. First of all, hi everybody. It's nice to meet you. See like maybe two faces that I've seen before. It's nice to meet the rest of you. So yeah, I feel like I'm at the end. I'm at the beginning of a new cycle or something, but at the end of a 16-year research project that I really didn't think would take 16 years, that really ended like just 2 weeks after I published my video. The video is kind of like the capstone of it, the Rebuilding Society on Meaning video. And it started with me being kind of cocky when I worked at Couchsurfing. So before that, I did like flash mobs and things like that. I was kind of like a, I don't know, tech artist of some kind. But then I worked at Couchsurfing and I had the experience of like we had about 2 million users at the time. It went up to maybe 10 million. Um, and I had the experience of like making the social network that caused a lot of meaningful encounters among 2 million people. And then I was kind of hooked. I was like, this is like, I've never had impact on this scale. It's amazing or something. And I became really bullish about couchsurfing and the internet and in general, like big projects like couchsurfing, Wikipedia, Meetup, or whatever. And and I started giving talks. If you don't do this, but if you Google around enough, you can find like a TEDx talk where I talk about how couchsurfing is the beginning of the adventure economy, and the internet will turn us all into like um, gift giving adventurers that like don't really care about money and like know that we can trust almost every stranger around us, and our lives will be kind of continuous trust falls. And I was really full of it. Um, and then pretty soon after that, Airbnb started in, and a bunch of other, and Facebook put out news feed, and people started getting addicted to their smartphones, um, and I was like, oh, it's a little more complicated than I thought. Um, and I think so. That was really the that's the arc. Like, it's more complicated than I thought. Okay, well, I still want to make this kind of beautiful difference in the world, but I have to reckon with a whole bunch of social forces that I had no clue about, right? Um, and so then there were a lot of steps to it, and I think if I had known it would take 16 years, I probably wouldn't have done it. Um, or I would have done it differently. At least I would have become a professor or something and studied it in a kind of a way where I got a continuous paycheck and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, instead I did all these little things. Like I co-founded the Center for Humane Tech, which was time well spent then, because at that point I had the idea that maybe we just needed to change the like master metrics instead of engagement metrics. We need to measure something else. Um, that was wrong too. And yeah, then I started another startup, which also had which was kind of about changing the economy, but it kind of naive about that. Um, that was kind of in a way, there's been some similarities recently. That was kind of like my holochain phase. I mean, my startup was before holochain, but it was kind of like I thought something like that would work. Um, and and then slowly I read more and more. I slowly went from like reading economists to like sending them emails to like having them review my work, like to like I sort of slowly became like a peer among social scientists and philosophers instead of like a distant student. um and I slowly started to like feel like I had a grip on what I was actually dealing with 16 years ago with couchsurfing and Airbnb and this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, kind of descending into um into like I didn't really a lot of this 16-year period I didn't really have a vision for my life. Like I didn't have like a career plan or like you know what I mean? Like I was just kind of doggedly and somewhat ridiculously pursuing this big question, which is roughly speaking like why is it that markets get us blue jeans that we want and get us all this stuff from all around the world, but they can't get us meaning and they can't get us togetherness? Like what's with that? Like why is it the economy can do so much for us but not these things, and that it's actually bad for these things? So I had this like research question and I just kept plugging away at it in a kind of an obsessive uh, outsider way, but always getting like enough people, like I don't know, famous professors would like respond to me and we'd talk about it and stuff like that. So like I always got kind of enough of a grip that I never like lost hope or something and just got real and got a job or whatever. And then, yeah, I guess over the last 4 years, it's been better because I started coming up with solutions and teaching, and people were implementing them, and they were kind of working. And so then I kind of like, now I'm kind of like finally crawling my way out of that research hole, and now I'm really completely out of it, actually, because like the school has become like somebody else is the CEO of the school now and is in charge of scaling it. I'm shifting to this spreading the gospel kind of like rebuilding meaning kind of advocacy thing, which is much more fun. And I also have like a big team for that. We don't have funding yet, but we do have like, I feel very supported, and I don't feel like I'm an individual on like a solitary quest at all anymore. And so that's like a big relief. Um, yeah, I feel a little bit like, when you talk to heroin addicts, they're like, man, I lost 2 decades of my life, man. I was like, I feel a bit like that, but it was a research question, but in terms of hardship.
Incredible. It's such a beautiful answer. Thank you for the for being so candid and for giving us all of that detail. It reminds me that one of the things that I just love the most about your presentations, the metaphors that you choose, and the style and presence that you bring to them, is this really kind of occasionally and well-timed comedic edge. So just as a kind of shout out, the very end of your video where you're doing your references and you have all of the faces of the people and they start dancing together to a rap song is like one of the most classy moments in intellectual YouTube history, I think. So
Thank
we could just
you.
put that up there. Before I ask any specific questions about this, there's just something that you said that was really like attracted my attention. I wonder if I can just draw you on it a little bit further, which is this notion of becoming a peer. And the reason that I'm so interested in this is that Kernel is all about peer-to-peer learning, and we take that from the peer-to-peer networks about which we're learning. But the fact that there's so much struggle in even becoming a peer is really fascinating to me. And you said you didn't have like a vision or a grand kind of idea of where you were going, but you had this question. And it's fascinating to me that it took 12 years to kind of become a peer in some sense. But I wonder, like looking back retrospectively, you say if I'd known it take 16 years, I might not have done it, and I might have done it differently. I wonder, like, what would you say to people who are looking to become peers in whatever field it is that their question is grounded, that might help them realize that in a potentially more direct fashion than your story?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it's tricky. Um, I think if I could have whispered my research question into like 19-year-old, 20-year-old me, and said, Joe, like I could have found a path, and it would have been in academia, because it's more or less philosophy and economics that I used most, a little sociology. Um, and those are things you can study and get a master's in and get a PhD in and make a PhD thesis in and then be a professor, and you can write papers and so on. And honestly, I don't know, probably some of you know Glenn Whale. He's kind of like, I feel like he's kind of like a twin. He's like uh, focused on many of the same issues or similar issues to what I focused on, but he did it while getting paid the whole time. And in fact, like rising in some kind of academic esteem for most of the time. And I could have done that if I had known in time, I guess, but I didn't do it that way. I think because I underestimated the amount of work mainly, and also because I didn't realize so quickly what the fields were where I needed to become a peer. Um, but I guess, I mean, there were some things that like, uh, there's a general pattern that works even if you're outside academia, which is you do a shit ton of reading, and then at some point you kind of know what you're talking about, and then when you talk to somebody, they're like, oh, you know what you're talking about, and then you're peers.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's direct, it's simple, it's lovely.
Yeah, maybe I'll tell you, I can tell you two quick anecdotes where, so about 5 years ago, I ran a precursor of the piling up strangers transaction cost analysis past a pretty famous economist. Um, and we just met for coffee. I said, hey, could you meet for coffee? I was like, I want to do an analysis. It's kind of like this Gaussian transaction cost analysis from the famous paper Theory of the Firm. But this is like in a different domain, but it's like a kind of an analogous. I want you to tell me if you think it's right or not. And here I am, like I don't have econ training really, right? But I'm doing something. I'm trying to make a claim that's like would be kind of a landmark econ paper. And so yeah, we're just at coffee, and I'm like, yeah, this is what I think the transaction cost analysis of this is. What do you think? And I'm like super nervous. And he's like, I think you're right. And that was like a great moment for me. Like that was like so I guess just try to make those things happen is sort of if I have somebody's advice, like if I'm giving somebody advice, like uh check your work, like get a coffee, that kind of thing, you know?
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's really wonderful having the confidence to make that invitation out into the world and then actually show up and present your work. It takes a lot, but I think it's really, really beautiful advice. Um, and Joel, like one of the things that really strikes me also about the way that you describe the story is that there is this long period of struggle, primarily centered in the sense that it's just you've got this question and you like got your teeth into it, and there's like little moments of hope that come and that keep you kind of going, just like a little bit more hopium each time and off you go. But the sense of the burden of it being on you in this kind of individualistic sense, and then as you've spoken about in the last 4 years, even if you don't have the funding that you need for the team to sort of take the gospel of rebuilding meaning into the world, there's still a sense of support. There's still a sense that meaning is made between us, right? And that realization as you come into the ability to articulate meaning in your life in these very pragmatic, grounded, practical, and insightful ways almost seems to be simultaneous with the recognition, this isn't just me anymore. And there's this like, and it's like one of the most interesting things about the actual work itself for me as well, which is that like markets don't give us togetherness and belonging, because accounting for collective co-creation and collaboration is really difficult. We're very, very good at making stuff for like one person, a smartphone. Everybody gets one, put it in your pocket, look at your screen, don't ask too many questions. Read what we tell you. But we're terrible at kind of like collective goods, club goods. There's many ways of kind of describing it. And I wonder if like if you have some insights into that, which we can, really kind of like look into and take it further into communities. But just where does this thing of the battle with accounting properly for collective co-creation come from, and why? Like, why is that such a key piece of this thing about meaning and belonging?
Mm. Yeah, one thing that's uh, so I come from this transaction cost angle, and one of the transaction costs that can be most important is just the cost of accounting itself. Um, so I run this school for social design or whatever, and that means we have to figure out how much to charge and how much each person involved gets paid, and it's a lot of different people's labor and work that goes into this, right? And it's actually changing all the time, like because something in the course goes wrong. I wrote the textbook pretty much, but like something in the course goes wrong, somebody else fixes the textbook. Now, actually, I didn't write the textbook anymore, right? And if we're doing some kind of like, if like we're all in it together and it's not about the money, then we don't need to do a whole bunch of like, okay, is it worth it for me to make this change to the textbook because the student had a question? Like, or is this actually not going to get me paid at the end of the day, and it's not worth it for, I should just like do my job in a more minimal way or whatever? Or actually, is Joe going to unfairly get paid for the part of the textbook that I just wrote? Like, right, like there's all this stuff, right? And as soon as you have cash flow, you have a whole bunch of accounting overhead, and it's exhausting. And often something isn't worth it just because of the accounting. Or there's all these issues of fairness and like there's a different part of yourself gets engaged when you're thinking about the accounting. And I guess I think of it actually as a part of the issue is that people have real financial needs, right? So, you may need to send your kids to private school, or they're not going to be able to go to university because your town has a shitty public school or whatever. And or you may have health care costs that are, so then you really do need to think about these things like, should I change the textbook, or do I need to, work in the manner that maximizes my income? Um, a lot of people are pulled very tight into this mode where they're always accounting, where they have to count the dollars or count the pennies, and this is going to eclipse a whole bunch of projects where the accounting itself makes it kind of untenable, to do all of that, right? Um, so that's part of the answer, is the transaction cost of accounting itself. And part of the answer is that there's a lot of things that it's very hard to, like science in general has this problem where it's very hard to say who gives credit, or we're seeing this in AI art too, right? It's like very hard to say who deserves credit for something you make on Midjourney. Um, and yeah, anything that you do in science, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And so there too, the accounting is very hard. Um, and and that's why we see these kind of middlemen and third parties. We see like you get a university salary and then you're expected to do all sorts of crazy stuff without nickel and diming it, right? And those things kind of work, sort of, but they don't super work. It depends on how tight the whole system is. That's a first cut at the answer.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And it links, I mean, like, so a different part of the brain is engaged when we're counting, and particularly when we're counting always, and those costs rise as we try and do it in a manner which is more granular and truly accounts for the unique contributions of each person, which change, and especially if we're working in ways or in organizations which allow for more flexible roles, which allow for the kind of friendship that you're really trying to design for, then that becomes exponentially more difficult. And one of the reasons for this, it seems to me, is that that part of the brain which is engaged in constant accounting also has to do primarily with notions of status, notions of reputation, these really important social signals by which we have evolved and which still rule a large part of our interactions, whether that's biologically, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, all of this. And you mentioned in this video, but sort of left a tentative kind of cliffhanger there that, oh, well, there's some cool methods that we might be looking at in terms of like managing or navigating, managing is the wrong word, navigating status and reputation, particularly in the context of compensation and these kinds of, proper attribution of work in co-creative environments. I wonder if you'd be willing to discuss a little bit more what has your attention there at the moment.
Yeah, I'll split that up into two. So there's sort of two questions I think that I can ask. One is like, what was I talking about in that part of the video? And the other is like, what's our maybe research direction for trying to figure out some of these attribution and issues? So I can tell you the research direction, which is we're trying to do, we're first building, so there's some kind of Marxism analog that we can imagine that's something like, from each according to their ability, to each according to like what makes their lives most meaningful, or something like that. And this is hard to figure out. So this is like way better than just meeting your needs, right? Like this is like whatever kind of comprehensive support would help you engage in your most meaningful life. And yeah, so one part of that is like, what should an individual pay attention to like, what can we make a recommender system more or less that like points people towards things that are meaningful for them? And then a step up from that is like, what could the other people in your community or network do for you that would like Andy, what should you pay attention to help me make my life meaningful, right? And then a third level would be, how can we pool resources to make each other's lives more meaningful? And I think those problems are all related and they're difficult in that order. And they kind of build on each other. So that's kind of our explicit research direction, and it's part of our machine learning research direction, is a kind of systems to do each of those things. So first, meaning aligned recommenders. Second, a kind of a social network structure that helps people make each other's lives meaningful. And then third, resource allocations. That's the research direction. We don't really have we have some work in the recommenders area that I can refer people to if they want. There's a kind of a draft paper. With status, one of the things that we're concerned with as a community, as a kind of, because we're starting this sort of movement, and actually several of the people that are helping us start the movement were early people involved with effective altruism, and they really don't like how it turned out. So one of the things we're aware of is status dynamics and how they often elevate the wrong people. I think there needs to be role models and public figures and things like that in a movement or a community, but I think it's almost pretty reliable that they're not the people that it's often the people who want status, not the people who deserve it or who are the best role models or best stewards or whatever of that status. And one thing that we're doing is we're mapping it. So we have a kind of a secret map of how people, we have sort of maps of who seems to have power, and also maps of who seems to be going after power. And anybody can add a comment in this internal only document. So it's quite a rich map. The idea is like, err on the side of including someone, even if it's kind of an accusation, but let's be very visible and vulnerable in it, and so on. And then we have kind of a protocol for checking in on that. So this is like a work in progress, but this is, and we also have a game that one of our members made called Guru Tactics, where we practice different kinds of status manipulation games on each other, which makes it much easier to call someone out. So if someone's, for instance, there's a lot of people actually in some of these scenes, there's a lot of people who use their intelligence to gain status, use their word, they sort of play word games, they use words like anti-rivalrous to sound really smart. So that's one of our guru tactics. And so sometimes you'll just play a game where you do that and see if you can kind of gain status. And that makes it much easier to call people out and kind of level the playing field, because we have all these tactics and we have this game. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, to allow people in safe environments, or at least containers specifically designed for the exploration of otherwise difficult emotional or psychological dynamics, is really fascinating. And it actually applies quite deeply to what it might mean to have AI as a true conversational partner, because a lot of people within Kernel have had this experience that interacting with ChatGPT, when you ask it serious questions and you try to get it to tell you what's happening in Ukraine, or one of it inevitably says, "Oh, so sorry, I can't answer that. I'm just really, it's not my domain, and I was only trained until 2021," and all the rest of the stuff. Whereas if you ask it playful improv questions, "Hey, design a play in which Putin gets cast as some kind of Shakespearean figure," and then naturally it comes up with the most incredible stuff, and you get sort of these really interesting insights, almost like playing improv everywhere with with the machine, which is rather an interesting inner dynamic to how these kinds of technologies might be conscientiously and consciously used. So I wonder, you can respond to that if you like. I also want to say that let's throw it open. So if you have questions for Joe, if you would like to make a comment, if you want to bash value cards or say something better about pipes and funnels, please. The floor is open. So that's for you. But if you want to talk a little bit about ML and the inner game, Joe, it's back to you.
One of the things that we're doing a ton of research on, and it's great, and a ton of people, amazing people from all the major corporate labs and stuff are chiming in, is on conversations with LLMs that help reveal a person's values and sources of meaning. And we hope to release something that does this in a few months. It's really cool. It's really cool to be able to talk with an artificial, dialogue agent and have the feeling that it's like pulling out of you what makes your life meaningful and capturing it in these beautiful little cards. So that's one thing I'll say on that. There's been a bunch of comments in the chat. Maybe I don't know if there's a question. I have read Geeks, Mops, and Sociopaths, of course.
Andreas, I see you. Unmute yourself, perhaps.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. Thank you, Joe, for sharing your story. The deep why question story. It seems to me like you really took an effort to find the places between the usual institutions in society, and that's like something very, very hard to do, and takes a lot of effort to really discern everything that is in place, and to say, no, it's not quite. I don't want to go into the economic stuff too much, and don't want to go into the philosophy stuff too much, but I need things from both, and then to move forward, to even be able to say what I want to say. I've watched your video, and it was really interesting. I'm thinking, like, you mentioned obviously that you're very optimistic about technology and stuff like that. In the beginning, you said something like that Facebook had increased the screen time more than TV. And towards the end, I think I was missing that. Like, what is your general sense there, or your direction with your current research and what you're aiming for? Are you still like aiming for reducing the screen time? Like, what's the kind of relationship of developing our relationship with technology? Like, can we only get out of this by depending more on technology, to relate to each other, or like can we use it to unwind ourselves a little bit, find the spaces again? Yeah, something in that direction would interest me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that I don't think that screen time is content is a bit of an enemy of mine, which is a little different than screen time. I don't think screens are that good, like as a user interface element, or as a, like, one thing is that they get in between us, right? Like usually a screen is per person. I think that like the general question is like, what kind of tech landscape would really serve human beings? And obviously you like, tech does serve human beings. Like there's like eyeglasses. Nobody's like, oh shit, I hate that I have eyeglasses or contact lenses, I'm so dependent on them or whatever. Like there's tech. You can make tech that really serves people, but we have tech that doesn't. And so the question is kind of like how to change that. And I think it's kind of up and down the stack. Like the actual form factor of the machines is part of what doesn't serve people, like the screens. the structures of the recommenders and the social networks, like the content focus, for instance, like the idea that things are just feeding you, drip feeding you things to read and watch or whatever by yourself. That doesn't serve people. The business structure of these giant corporations that that are maximizing, like Facebook is a good example. So they use my methods, my survey methods, to figure out how meaningful newsfeed is, but they don't maximize the meaningfulness of newsfeed. They like keep it at just the right level so that people don't bail too much, right? So obviously, like this corporation, it's not serving humanity in any kind of pure way, right? It's doing some kind of sad mix of serving people in some ways and hurting them in other ways. So yeah, does that answer your question? Like we just need to fix all those things, like so that they all serve people.
Yeah, just all those things. Just a small closing comment then. I think lots of things are out of balance, and lots of things there in technology. And I think, yeah, I think there are wonderful efforts like yours, which try to rebalance, trying to give us, yeah, kind of grip in a different direction than it's going today. And I think we need this. We need to rebalance and reconfigure a lot of our relationships with technology. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
There's a question from Paul in the chat, and I see Ray is also unmuted. Whichever one, Paul or Ray, please.
It's all right. I'll go first, Vivek. And Joe, thank you for the talk. And yeah, I think as Andy said, it really reflects a lot of what we want to know here in Kernel. One thing I wanted to ask is, as I was going through some of the stuff that Andy shared, was the games that you create, and I think I would want to know more about what was the reason for creating these games. And I ask because there are a lot of people creating games now in Web3, and I think we should strive to look for creating different games than the ones that we've been creating, like just copying the ones on these attention economy platforms, right? So, and also I want to know more if you have any ideas about like what kind of games we should be creating now that we think of meaning, and what LLMs and AI will do in the future. So yeah, happy to hear about that.
Yeah, there's 3 reasons that I've created games. And games of all 3 types are on meaning supplies. So one reason I create games is to test or prototype social theories. So if I theory about status, for instance, and I think maybe there's something you can do about status, like maybe there's, this thing will change status dynamics or something, right? Then I'll make a game where you can do that thing and the status dynamics are somehow observed. And I actually do a thing in my house in Berlin every few weeks where I have people over and we play games. And a lot of it is just like me being an experimental sociologist, like testing some theories. That's one reason. Another is that maybe the second 2 ones are quite related. So another one is that games are kind of the simplest social design. Like they're, I think, the equivalent of a sketch in UX design. So if you're going to make like a cohort-based training program, for instance, like, and you want to sort of test it out or prototype it or something, it's like making a kind of a group game that can happen on Zoom or that can happen in person can be a really cool way to test some of the aspects of it. And you could just pick an aspect, like maybe it's the sequence of things that people do or the way that they're supposed to connect with each other or something. So I use games as a kind of social prototyping. And then the third reason is about meaning, which is, I think this is almost the same as the second reason, but games are kind of like this, one of the simplest spaces. So if you have something that's really meaningful to you and you don't have space for it, making a game is kind of like often You know, so if it, let's say there's a type of adventure that I'm missing. So there is one. I really love exploring cities and finding kind of unusual things. And I have a bunch of games on Meaning Supplies that are about that, because this is like a really easy way for me to identify a source of meaning that I have that's underserved and serve it. Um, and this is what I want to turn Meaning Supplies into eventually, unless somebody beats me to it, is like a cross index of people's sources of meaning and games or practices that like that meet them. So different types of creativity that people long for, and a bunch of games that are good for that type of creativity, different kinds of vulnerability, different kinds of adventure, and so on, right? Um, and I have the feeling that there will be a renaissance in games because of our like renaissance in meaning. Like the more people become aware of the sources of meaning that more of those things become data objects, and somebody's like, oh yeah, I talked to the LLM, I'm missing these 6 sources of meaning in my life. I had this one in college, but I haven't had it since, and I have, you know what I mean? The more people can like be very clear about that, the more people will see games as like a very easy way to get some of those missing sources of meaning addressed in their lives.
So
Thank you
I
for
have a
that.
question about, I'm sorry, was there more, Paul? You want to say?
No, go ahead, Ray. Thank you.
So my question is about how much you can confidently generalize the findings from the work that you've done when you think about the value cards or the social experiments you do in games or the technologies that you are considering. You know, to what extent do you have confidence that this is universal and the findings would be consistent across languages and cultures, or to what extent is it very dependent on a particular language or culture? And the reason I think that that matters is that all of those, of course, co-evolve together. And it's a very interesting thing to think about whether systems that are highly scalable can allow for the evolution towards a more like cooperative global society, or does it really just help societies diverge from each other, which is a bad thing, because when it becomes difficult for one society to understand another, it's harder to reach agreement and it's more likely to create conflict.
Cool, great question. And to a little bit extent, the jury's still out. But I can tell you what I've observed so far. But I don't feel like I have a. We're going to find out in the next year. But what I've observed so far is that some groups break apart, and some groups that didn't previously see eye to eye connect very strongly. The biggest or the easiest way to show that is with like ideological groups. For instance, if you take a bunch of people that care a lot about decentralization and you get them together and have them talk about their sources of meaning, they won't really care about decentralization very much after that. They'll care about a bunch of specific ways that they love to connect or love to work. And some of those things will be things that they kind of like each one individually said like, oh, I think decentralization will help with this. But actually they sort of drop down a level in terms of granularity, and they connect over these other things instead. So you see like ideologically bound groups break apart. But you also see people connect across, like if you do this with like people in the US that are, I don't know, Republican and Democrat, like they'll reaffiliate around sort of around like shared values or sources of meaning about like, I don't know, raising kids or something, and how they love to watch their children learn things or something like that, you know, some source of meaning that fits well on a values card, so that they connect, you know, but like in different groups than they were before. And And that seems to be pretty universal. Like there's a lot of universal, there's a long tail of them. So there's some sources of meaning that really only apply to like jazz musicians or improv dancers or, you know, some kind of small subgroup that's not most people. And there's some that are more just for parents, and some for people that are leaders, like managers, or, you know, that are leaders in their community or something, and other people can't relate to them. But a leader in an Islamic community and a leader in a business community might have converged on the same source of meaning about their leadership. So it's quite complicated. It seems very cross-cultural to me, but it's not like we all just merge into one, you know, lump of people with the same values. It's there's like kind of a long tail, and there's a lot of different subgroups and things. Is that good answer?
It's a helpful answer. Have you also looked at like to what extent people are not just different, but that it's just a slightly different cognitive hierarchy of what are their highest values and which are secondary, or the source of meaning? Because that's very indicative too.
Yeah, to attach some numbers. In a large population, there'll be something like 4,000 distinct sources of meaning. Each person will have like 200 sources of meaning, but at any given time, maybe 10 of those will be like a hotspot in that person's life that has to do with what they, what kinds of environments they're in, and what kinds of, what's really powerful for them, what's really missing, what's really like, we call it edge. Like edge values are like values that, are marginally, like whether it's happening or not is like a big deal in your life. So you might have a whole bunch of values that are well supported, like, so it's not really marginally valuable to you, even though they're values that if they weren't well supported in your life, you would suddenly really find them very important. And then you have like this kind of hotspot. So people don't, as to whether the 200 that each person has, whether they could in different circumstances have a different set of 200, that's very hard to say from the same 4,000. That's I can't tell you, but I can tell you that there's a lot of overlap in these sets of 200 if they only basically draw from a set of 4,000. I don't know. That's some of it.
Okay. One more question related to that. Have you like tried to do research with people that are fluent in multiple languages and see if the values are the same or not, depending on what what language you engage with them in, to try to get the results? Because there are other, you know, results that show that sometimes people may have even a distinctly different personality in one language from another, depending on like what time in their life they learn that language. And so I think it would be really interesting to look at that population, you know, on values as well, but maybe you already have.
Sure. Well, one thing that we already do is when people get a values card, it's kind of written in their language. So it's like a reflection back to them of what their source of meaning is. But then we have a kind of a process by which two people can say, oh, actually, this is the same value. Like, and that's basically, if it's in one way of saying that is if it's enabled in the same space. Like, so if all the same memories, so usually we have the values cards, and we also have stories, like you know, descriptions of like what was it that happened to that person, like what are many times that you've experienced that kind of meaning in your life, right? And so people can look at the stories and they can say, oh, that same exact sequence of stories, I recognize that those match up with this value in my life. Our value cards are written differently, but actually there's no circumstance in which this value card would be a good description of that circumstance and this other one wouldn't be. So we can say that they're the same.
Incredible.
Just a very, can I ask a very quick question? I think that will be easily answered by Joe. When you just mentioned you have different people answering the value cards, you haven't built by any chance a game, Joe, where people are playing the game and through the game are filling out their value cards and then doing things with that, like creating value cards from games or something like that? Do you have already something like that?
No, but I think we will in a few months.
Nice, thank you.
I'd like to invite Tina, if you would like to, you had a beautiful sort of statement / question about intention and the value field, and then Shan, if I saw that your hand was up. So Tina first, then Shan.
Sure. I wonder, yeah, I'm really curious about intention, but it's really interesting, this connection with narrative that you're bringing in or too. That sort of leads to this ability for us to overlay values and kind of see some resonance through our narratives that allow us to recognize the wholeness of each other and like how we do share this human experience in a way. So I'm curious about how intentions from the galvanizer, from the one who's bringing these values into an articulate space between us. How much does that matter? Because like when I was raising my child and we were, I would go into a school and I would really see how much of the leader, the principal's values were basically creating a lot of the conflicts that were happening. And so I'm just curious what the dynamic there with what you're doing and how you address.
So one of the reasons why I'm using the term sources of meaning now more often than values is because people use values to mean a whole bunch of different things. And one of the common things that people use values for that is different than the way I mean it is for social expectations or social visions, ideas about how things should be. People should be on time. People should people should talk in an equal amount, fairness, I don't know, all these kinds of diversity, whatever, all this kind of stuff. And these things are inevitably conflictual in a way that what I call sources of meaning aren't. Because sources of meaning are more about what an individual finds meaningful. So they spread in a very different way and they interact in a very different way. Where there's in a way always like a fight, like if you're pushing for a kind of fairness and somebody else is pushing for a kind of excellence, surfacing or something, then you get in a fight, right? Like, because there's some places where being fair is going to be less excellent and being excellent is going to be less fair, whatever. And also people have different ideas in their heads about how things should be, and how things should be is always kind of a contention. But sources of meaning spread in a different way where people get inspired. So somebody finds, I don't know, like your science teacher or whatever finds like a tree really beautiful, that it contains an ecosystem, and it's got all these bugs in it and stuff like that. And then the kids are like, wow, it's got all these bugs in it or whatever. And like, that's a source of meaning spreading, right? So both of them spread, but in a very different way. And it's, I think, quite, that's one of the things that people love about going through our course is we sort of study this. Like that's the first couple weeks is observing in your life how these different kinds of things are spreading in your scenes. And yeah, obviously, like a person can be influential in either of those, right?
Beautiful.
Hi, Joe. I'm Sean. So we've been talking a lot about meaning and narratives, and historically, the main driver of meaning has come from religion. And in Kernel, we've also discussed like ideas around how fragmentation of narratives and a disagreement of meaning can cause lots of social unrest. And also for the last 3 weeks, I've been going down a really deep rabbit hole on the relevance of religion and spirituality in healthcare. So what do you think the role of religion and spirituality is in the context of it informing meaning and the meaningful world that you're trying to build?
Yeah, my collaborator Elli would be better at that question. This is like she's like super nerdy about it. And if you didn't watch her talk, I recommend it. I think Andy also, and it's a little bit more about this stuff, but also she loves questions like that. So go find her. One thing that's important, I think, is to separate like the meaning of life and the meaning in life. or kind of like the more cosmological, where do I fit in the world story versus like what was meaningful to me this week. And the values cards that those focus on meaning in life, not meaning of life, right? Like, so I focus more than Elli, I focus on like what's meaningful this week, not where do I fit in the cosmic. But I think religion does both, right? Like religion is like a lot of sermons, a lot of religious texts are conveyors of sources of meaning, of what makes a meaningful life, what makes a good life or something. And so this is something that we're really missing. We're missing both. Like both of those things are kind of messed up in our current society, I think. And we're excited to well, Ellie's excited to fix the other one, the meaning of life thing. And we're both excited to fix the meaning in life thing. Like that, one way to put it is the transmission of wisdom, like transmission of the idea of what is a good life, or how what makes a meaningful existence, how we can help each other with that. And so one thing that I'm excited about with this work is that can become sort of more objective. Like a phrase that I've been throwing around is big data virtue ethics, like the kind of Google Maps of virtue or something like that, right? I do hope that we can actually maybe take that away from the domain of religion, and make it just like common sense, not common sense, but like something more like Google Maps or Wikipedia, like, and something more inherently pluralist too, where you're just like kind of like, here's all the great ways to be a good parent, and there's different ways to be a good parent, and here's a list, something like that, instead of like there's one way to do it, or there's instruction from a biblical text or something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody. We know Andy's going to have to drop in South Africa, but we're going to keep going for maybe 10 or so, Joe, if that's still okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Bye, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you, everyone who has to go right at the hour. We'll let you go peacefully. I wanted to pass the mic to Dhanaya first, if I could, and then Glenn. Dhanaya has some history with humane technology that may be worth sharing too.
Hey, Vivek. Hi, everyone. I have been listening to Joe's talk and the meaningful questions which Andy have been asking. I have been researching on meaning, values, and choices for last 6 years now. And I have a little bit of history with Center of Human Technology. Like when I first arrived in the Valley, like in 2015, I would say, and I just the Nook idea means we were just gathering together to make Nooks happen around in the Valley. And I happened to meet someone from Center of Human Technology. I even didn't know that what I am going to do with this idea means if I can make something happen, or what are the things happening, even though we were sure that there were a lot of parents who were working with me to make this a reality. And then I stumbled with someone and they published an article on Parents Nook, on what Nook is about. Now, when I think about it, I even didn't imagine that it would become something like what it is today. And lots of roads traveled, lot of researches, lot of work, and here I am finding out meaning. What does collective choices, what are the relationship between meaning, choices, and values, and what happens when we offer alternate choices in a society which is struggling to find meaning. And I don't have answers, but I'm doing research. Here I am, so I can very well. Yeah, it's a journey.
Cool. I have maybe a couple things to read if you want. One is from my textbook. It's called Making Values Concrete. And that's a lot about the relationship between values and choice, or meaning and choice. I'll post a link in a second. And I don't know if you know philosopher Ruth Chang's work. I've built a lot on Ruth Chang's work, and she studies the relationship between meaning and choice.
Okay, that would be great. I would love to read the book. Yeah, I have never read, but I'm reading Amartya Sen's work. And okay, give me a second.
Okay.
I will also yeah, and
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Tanea. And then, yeah, the Parents Nook project, Joe. It's a really beautiful.
I recently started reading the book Economics for the Common Good. So by so this book, he was the owner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2014, and so this also makes a ton of sense for me and the project. So I would love to read more such books and researches which are aligned. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe Glenn, if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Joe. And your work on funnels, tubes, and spaces has so deeply resonated that it's like a core thing I think about in terms of how I'm building the company we're building now, and it's really been transformational for me. And like,
I want to ask.
yeah, so that's like, yeah.
I wanted to ask Andy the same thing. Send me descriptions of the thing you're designing and how it changed because of this, because I love this is my favorite thing to receive.
I will definitely do that. Yeah.
I was going to make it this way. Instead, I made it this way. I love this shit. So please send it to me.
Oh, totally. I will write you, because it's a very specific set of stuff too that I think is like, it's weeded into my brain, and you've made a difference already in terms of how we're building stuff. So thank you for that. I think one thing I've been thinking a lot about kind of on this path is like how communities can build and design their own tools effectively, and how Web3 is enabling us to do that in various ways, especially around things like community agreements. But I'm curious now that we have, you have in front of us all the kernel folks, and we have some shared sense of meaning, right? Like that's why we all keep showing up together in this way. It's a community of care, and I'm curious, like, is from your view, like how Kernel has started building some of their own tools too, in terms of like, what's Kernel's own wallet? What are the services? What's the we're using Slack today. I don't know if we'll use Slack tomorrow, right? Like, what are the ways that this can change and shape in terms of fitting those affordances to how this community wants them to work? And so I'm curious, like, as you think about from a community lens, less of the individual value card, but as we think about from Kernel, what advice you might have for how we can think about starting to shape those tools, or what that would look like through your lens, I think would be interesting to hear. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I teach, so like the course that I teach has 2 units, each is 5 weeks. And the first is about the values cards. And people go through with their kind of social design projects. So community design for Kernel could be a project that somebody could go through. People get a lot, like you don't have to take the course. You can do a lot of this just from watching my talk or clicking through the textbook or whatever. But in the course, you would start by figuring out what kind of meaningful connections are most important for the kernel community to like what do people, what kinds of solidarity, connection, co-authorship, etc. are meaningful for this community. You'd come up with some values cards, and then you do the hard steps of those values. So like what makes it happen or not happen. And usually this gives people a lot of clarity about what kinds of media, what kinds of software, what kinds of community structures are necessary. And often you can implement them with something like Slack or Discord or Notion, or but you need some or maybe you make a bot or something. But first you need to know, how is it that we really want to connect? And then from there it's fairly straightforward. So that's the first half of the course, like how is it that we really want to connect? And then the second half is like, okay, what's hard about connecting that way? And how do people do it when it happens? And how do we make that much easier for people to connect in those ways? And yeah, there's almost always answers by kind of picking and choosing and structuring and making guidelines and making systems.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I think we probably have time for one more, perhaps from any voice who we haven't heard from, if anyone does feel compelled.
Thanks, Vivek. I'd love to just bring identity into the conversation, if only because those of you who know me know that I've been researching it for years and think that the entire approach to digital identity state sucks, as an academic term. Some of the paradigm that underpins computer science is almost entirely incompatible with the social sciences. And social science shares its conceptualization of identity with the bureaucracy, making us legible to the state, and then latterly making us legible to the system, as opposed to the social science conceptualizations, plural, which generally consider identity to be a capacity for a continuing process of sense making, which then leads into meaning making. And I can't help but think, Joe, that when I read your stuff or watch your videos, that we are looking at two sides of the same coin. And I'm desperately trying to figure out how I can springboard off your work in order to inform the digital mediation and augmentation of human identity as a substitute for the digital identity that we know today. So if you have any ideas.
I do, yeah. Cool. Yeah, I agree that there are two sides of the same coin. And my take is in the video, I call them space trains. I used to call them legitimation processes. Like people get, and this is kind of a little bit related in Web3 to like the soul-bound stuff, but I don't really like the soul-bound stuff that much. But I think that there's something much more organic, for lack of a better word, that's kind of similar to the soul-bound stuff, but much more organic, that happens in real life, which is like certain activities are only okay, like are only legitimate in certain contexts. So like, let's say you want to sit next to, you enter a bar, you see someone that you find attractive, you want to sit next to her. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to do beforehand involving like eye contact, smiling, like question you might ask her, like, is this seat taken or whatever. There's like, and anything that doesn't happen in that sequence makes it illegitimate of you to sit next to her, right? Or similarly, like with before a police officer can arrest someone, there needs to be a law, they need to like say a bunch of stuff, there's like a whole sequence, and otherwise the police officer is kind of like acting out in an illegitimate way. He's like not, he's abusing his power or something like that in a court. And so there's also like different social contexts where people examine the legitimacy of these moves, and they'll say, hey, like you didn't even ask if you could sit here. or in a court, you know, they say this police officer was not this was not a legitimate arrest, right? So I think those things are very interesting to study, and that's one of the things that we do at the later part of my course, is study how does something get legitimated, and what's the wisdom in that. You know, like there's this elaborate set of social norms and processes which make it so that this person is identified as a legitimate actor in this way or not, and where did that come from? And I think by studying those processes, you can sometimes improve them. It's not that the ones that occur in society are in some kind of optimum, but you can also find a ton of wisdom in them. And I think that's, and this is related to what I call space trains in the talk. So I don't know, that's kind of like where I might point you in terms of how I think of identity.
I think we have a similar focus in so much as soul-bound or self-sovereign identity reifies the individual, atomizes the individual. And to me, and to you, I think life isn't like that. It's in between. It's we are people through other people, and that is a complex that computer science hasn't yet grappled with, and that's part of the problem. I think it's if we're going to allow for the digital to help us rise up to the unprecedented super wicked problems of the 21st century, then we need to start tailoring it to us rather than have us tailor ourselves to it. So thanks. I will continue to.
I'll say one
follow
more
your
thing
work.
about that, which is there's a general approach that we use in my work a lot and that I advocate, which is just like study however the good thing that you want to spread in the world is already happening in kind of obsessive anthropological detail. And then, you know, if you want to bring it online or something, then you'll have a lot of information about what might be necessary.
Oh, 100%. That it's almost biomimetic, because I sometimes get the question when I say this is what we really need to do in terms of identity in the digital realm. I get the question, are you sure that's possible? And I say, yeah, we've already done it. Like, that's how our social species has got to where we've got to today. You know, it's fundamental to our ability to cooperate in super ways. So let's continue.
Yeah, Joe, thank you. Thank you, Philip. Thank you for that last question.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, there's so many voices that have made this call meaningful. Joe, anything you'd like to say as last words?
I think I'll just repeat this. Like if our work is reshaping stuff that you're building or whatever, let us know. And also spread it a little bit, because like a few people have said, people change what they're building just when they watch my talk. So you can have a really big impact just by spreading my talk with somebody who's building something that you know, maybe like, especially if you sense that that thing that they're building really probably would change if they were thinking in terms of spaces instead of funnels or something. You can really have a big impact just by sending a link. So yeah, do that. And also stay in touch. One of the things that we want to do is build, so it's a little tricky. The school makes space makers, and those we can keep track of. But as we can see from today, there's many other people that are making the kinds of things that we call spaces that aren't going through my program. They're just watching the video, which is free on the internet. I want to make a community that includes all of these people. So figure out how to, I don't know, just at least get your like, let make sure that we know about you, so that as we gather people under the Space Maker banner.
Is there maybe an email or somewhere as
go to rebuildingmeaning.org. You can write to hello@rebuildingmeaning.org, which I see and my teammates see. And yeah, everything is at rebuildingmeaning.org.
Good. Joe, thank you truly so much. You're reshaping many spaces, and spaces is definitely a concept that has permeated lots of different corners of Kernel. I have an outro song from our good friend Andy called Wisdom, a Good Year. We'll be here for a few. Thank you.